Hello, everybody, and welcome to Dreamspace Live for International Literacy Day. I'm Michael. I'm one of the teachers on the Microsoft Ireland Dreamspace team, and I'm going to be one of your hosts for the next 90 minutes for this live lesson. I'm also joined this morning by Niamh. Good
Hi,
morning,
everyone.
Niamh.
Hi, Michael. So excited for today's live event.
I am very, very excited for today's live event as well, and thank you so much for everybody who is joining us this morning. So let's get stuck right into it, Niamh. Let's look at what we're going to be learning about today. First and foremost, we are going to be discussing the importance of literacy as a whole. So we have a whole International Day dedicated to it by the UNESCO, and we're going to be discussing why it's important to have literacy skills, not just for us here in Ireland, but on a global scale as well. And looking beyond just being able to read our favorite books and write our favorite stories, looking at the importance it plays in our everyday life. Next of all, Niamh, what are we going to be doing?
Then we're going to be looking at MakeCode Arcade, and it's one of my favorite coding platforms because you get to make your own retro-style arcade game. So we'll look at that a little bit in a moment.
Yeah. As Niamh just mentioned, we're going to be creating our very own retro video games. But after we're finished those, we're actually going to put on our little critique lens, and we're going to go back and we're going to say, okay, what could we have done better if we were making those games, and what could I add to it afterwards? All right. So we're going to be building a pretty simple game today, just because of the time we have. It's going to be a fun game, though. It's going to be a full, complete, packaged game. And then you're going to have the opportunity, if your situation allows you to do so, to actually share your games with your friends around you or anyone who's around you. Let them have a go at it and let them kind of share some feedback on how you could make it better, you know? And then finally, Niamh, what are we going to be looking at?
We're going to be looking at the connection between coding and literacy because it is International Literacy Day. So I'm sure people are like, what is the connection there?
Yeah.
So we're going to be looking at that more in detail.
100%. And speaking of, let's have that deep dive into what exactly International Literacy Day is. It's celebrated every year on the 8th of September. It's an event organized by UNESCO. If people haven't heard of UNESCO before, what exactly is it, Niamh?
So UNESCO are a group of people, so by the United Nations, they're an agency in the United Nations, and they work together to promote like peace and security in the world around us, and they do this through things like education.
Yeah. So what this day is all about, first and foremost, is being able to read and write. So let's take a step back. What exactly does literacy actually mean? Well, it's the skills required to read and write primarily. There's also the skills of being able to listen and being able to speak and so on in a language. Being able to read and write is the core focus here. And basically we're going to have a look at today, and we're going to have some discussions about it today as well, is that how having those skills of being able to read and write, how that allows us to make good choices in our life. And speaking of, Niamh, why is it so important to kind of have those skills?
Well, you could say multiple answers for this one, but you're expanding on your knowledge, you're learning new things, but I think it's really important to understand and know what's happening in the world around us.
Yeah, exactly. So we're going to have maybe a deep dive into that. Yeah. Third of all, folks, then we have the fact that International Literacy Day is looking at, okay, yeah, let's celebrate literacy. Let's focus on how fun it is to read our favorite books and write our favorite stories and so on. But also equal access when it comes to literacy skills. So unfortunately, on a global scale, there's roughly around 800 million adults who do not have literacy skills, which means that they are illiterate. That's a big word that the UNESCO team uses when they discuss International Literacy Day. And this obviously has a lot of consequences. We're going to be discussing those consequences later on. And hopefully at the end of today's session, we're actually going to be exploring how we could hopefully benefit that as well. So not everyone in the world has the same chances to learn to read and write, and that's a big problem. So we're going to be looking at that in just a moment as well. And then finally, Niamh, we're going to be exploring how literacy skills actually helps us.
So it helps us make the world a better place.
Yeah, exactly. So the UNESCO focuses on the global goals for sustainable development. I'm sure a lot of the teachers and students joining us this morning as well have probably heard of those global goals. They were launched by the UN in 2015, and we have until 2030 to make the world a better place and actually achieve those goals. But we're going to be looking at and hopefully exploring how literacy can actually help us achieve those goals, in particular quality education, which is a big piece as well. Now, every single year, we have UNESCO celebrating International Literacy Day, and every single year they come up with a brand new motto. So the motto for this year is promoting literacy for a world in transition, building the foundation for sustainable and peaceful societies. So quite a mission, quite a mission, and a good goal to have there. Now, I suppose, Neve, what we're going to be doing throughout the day, of course, because it's International Literacy Day, is that we're not just going to pass by kind of big words and expect everyone to be able to understand them. We're going to have a little bit of a dictionary corner and discussion, you know? So the first kind of word that's jumping out there to me, and it's probably a tricky word. I suppose a lot of people maybe have different ideas for what it means. But literacy for a word in transition. So that key word, transition.
Yeah, that's a really interesting one because we're living in a world where there's a lot of change. So it just kind of means like the world is changing around us. So this is like in multiple different ways. So like after the pandemic, we have the digital change or digital transformation, as well as that we have the likes of like climate change and climate action that's happening. So that's all of how the world is changing around us.
Yeah, 100%. That core tagline beneath it as well is like building the foundation for sustainable and peaceful society. So obviously we know foundation, like building a house, building the foundation of a house, something stable that we can build off of, on top of. But then we have sustainable, and sustainability obviously is a word you probably would have heard about. It's a really important word right now. But a lot of the time people just think sustainability is, okay, it's recycling, it's being green, but it's actually so much more than that. Sustainability at its core is all about having the needs met of everyone in the world right now with the resources that we have, but also ensuring that future generations have their needs met as well. So leaving it as good as we found it is a kind of a core goal of what sustainability is all about. So now is going to be the perfect time to take a moment and just pause. We have 2 questions up for you on your screen. Have these questions discussed amongst your class, and we want you to approach it in a think, pair, share fashion. What I mean by that is I want you to read the questions out. First of all, as a student, I want you to kind of think about it. What would your answer be to it? I want you to turn to your partner beside you and discuss their answers and share your answer. And then finally, I want you to share it amongst your group. And hopefully, teachers, you can facilitate a discussion on a whole classroom base. And then we're going to come back in a few moments and discuss some of our answers to these questions as well. So we're going to take a moment now just to pause and discuss these questions. MakeCode Arcade. What is it all about? Well, introducing it, MakeCode Arcade is a platform that allows you to create kind of 80s style retro video games. So some examples would be, you know, the original Pac-Man, the original Super Mario Brothers, Sonic the Hedgehog, any kind of game that is really focused on kind of like pixel art. That is what you're going to be creating with MakeCode Arcade. If people aren't familiar with kind of pixel art or pixels, what would that mean?
A pixel is like a unit of color. So a pixel can only have one color at a time. So the more pixels you have, the better quality your image is going to be. Exactly,
yeah. So that's why all those kind of retro games look very kind of like blocky, because they're made up of just like 16 or 32 pixels, you know? So that's kind of games we're going to be creating today, but you can kind of get really in depth with it. We want to look at as well, obviously, why are we exploring gaming today? Why are we making a game for a day that's on International Literacy Day? Well, we want to look at and kind of have that perspective that coding is a modern language, okay? Like picking up all the other languages that we have, coding is just a new one, and it allows us to communicate with computers, communicate with machines, and similar to all other languages, the younger you are learning it, the better you're actually going to be able to pick it up on, right? So it's going to be really, really important to do that. But if this is the first time anyone's ever even heard the word coding or code, Neve, what does it mean?
So coding's all about giving instructions to a computer or device in a language that they understand. So just like we speak to each other in languages like English, Irish, Spanish, French, and so on, we have to speak to the computer in a language that it understands, and that's code.
Yeah, exactly. And then finally, we're going to have a brief look at why there's a link between reading and code. Okay, so believe it or not, being good at reading can make you a better coder. Understanding instructions, following game storylines in the context of video games, and then troubleshooting code all require strong reading skills or strong literacy skills, of course. But the word troubleshooting there, Neve, what do you think that means in the context of coding?
That's an interesting one. So I think it's like if you make mistakes or errors that you're able to fix them for yourself.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's a term called debugging when you code, and what exactly that means is essentially putting on those kind of debug glasses, reviewing your code, kind of really focusing on it, and spotting any errors or bugs you may have in your code. And something we always like to reiterate, especially as you start off on your coding journeys, is that all good coders make mistakes. They all make bugs. I'll let you know a little secret. A lot of the software engineers that we work with here in Microsoft, a lot of their jobs is actually writing code, testing it, seeing if it runs. There's going to be some errors or bugs in there, and then they go back and debug it. The big thing we like to encourage students on is that don't become disheartened if your code doesn't work the first time. That's part of the coding journey, really.
Absolutely.
So we're going to now have a brief discussion on what we're going to be basing our game on today in the theme of International Literacy Day. And Eve, what are we going to be basing our game on?
Our game is going to be based off the book Matilda by Roald Dahl.
Matilda by Roald Dahl, an excellent book. And let's catch everyone up on with a brief little overview of what that book is. And then we're going to have that little dictionary corner to examine any of the tough words we see here. So, in Roald Dahl's Matilda, a young girl named Matilda overcomes neglect from her parents through her love for reading and learning. Her journey underscores the transformative power of literacy, a theme that resonates with International Literacy Day, of course. At school, she encounters both supportive and oppressive figures, but it's her literacy skills and newfound telekinetic powers that empower her to create positive change for herself and her friends. This story serves as a compelling example of how literacy can be a tool for empowerment and social change. So, couple words jumping out at you there,
Yeah,
Niamh?
absolutely.
Yeah.
I think the first one there is probably oppressive. So what does oppressive mean? Well, oppressive means like to be cruel or harsh.
Yeah, exactly. Not letting you do what you want to do. So in the context of Matilda, it's going to be her parents here. So if you've read the book, essentially the parents were quite neglectful, kind of cruel to Matilda and not allowing her to do what she truly wanted to do and didn't really kind of encourage her to pursue her passion of reading and her enjoyment of books. Any other kind of big ones jumping out at you there?
Probably telekinetic powers. So explaining what that is. So if you read Matilda, you know that she had these powers.
Yeah.
What it means is that she's able to control things with her mind. So imagine being able to like open a door just with your mind or like move things around a room, which she was able to do.
Exactly, yeah. And then finally, it is empowerment and social change. So those are kind of two big pieces. So Matilda is all about a story of a young girl kind of being empowered by her teacher. It was Miss Honey was the teacher who, who encouraged her to kind of flourish in regard to her education, her reading, and also her telekinetic powers. And then social change as well, of course, is kind of making changes for the betterment of your community or the world around you or the people around you. Now, looking at the game basis, we're going to be creating a game based on this. So we need to have a player. So Super Mario Bros. Has Mario, Sonic the Hedgehog has Sonic. But our game, okay, is going to have Matilda as our player or our main character.
Very good.
You can see in your screen that we have kind of like a little pixel representation of what Matilda could look like in the game. You'll see in a moment as well that we can actually customize that. So you can actually use some of the pre-made assets that is found in MakeCode Arcade that allow you to kind of like customize and make your game your own. Secondly, Mario has his coins, Sonic has his rings, and Matilda has her
book.
So the core part of today's game is also going to be having Matilda chase around her collectible, which is going to be books in this case. And then finally, every good game has to have a compelling setting. We're going to be basing our game in just a town, a very simple one, because Matilda, she kind of traverses through different houses. Her school was a big piece, a location in the book, and her home as well. So we're just going to be basing on a town, and if we have time, we're going to be able to customize that and make it a bit more fitted to the story. So we've told you about our game. It's now time for you to take a moment and pause and to come up with what you want your game to be about. So as you can see on your screen, just like last time, you have 2 questions. We want you now just to take a moment to have a classroom discussion. Key concepts for today's game, okay? So we're going to go through a list, and how we're going to work this, Niamh, is we're going to look at the concepts, we're going to jump over to MakeCode Arcade, we're going to actually implement them and use them, and then we're going to jump back and learn about a few more to flesh out our game and develop it a small bit more. So hopefully now everyone has the key theme of what their game is going to be based on which book, and their favorite book or last book, and so on. So the first 2 ones we have concept-wise is sprite. So what exactly is a sprite, Niamh?
So sprite is like another word for a character in your game, pretty much.
Yeah, it's essentially the artwork for the characters and objects in the game, and we're going to be creating and controlling them. So for example, we mentioned earlier on, Matilda is going to be our character, or our player. Matilda is going to be a sprite, and then also the collectible of books is going to be a sprite as well. Secondly, we have variables. Now I know a lot of people when they start off in their coding journeys, I find variables a bit tricky to wrap their head around, but it's a really, really core part of computer science and coding. And variables in this instance is going to be able to store information like the player's score or their game timer, and they're used in a lot of different ways when it comes to MakeCode Arcade. When I introduce students to coding, I always like to think of it as, think of a variable like a box. You have to put a name on that box so that you can call upon it later on, and you can put information and data inside of it, take it out, and you can even do stuff in there.
That's a really great way to explain that.
Yeah. So time to actually now to jump over and look at MakeCode Arcade, our coding platform.
So this is one of my favorite websites. Like, I love making my own retro style arcade games.
So this is MakeCode Arcade. This is your homepage. So how you're going to access this, folks, is just going to arcade.makecode.com. We're going to pop that into Q&A as well. And you can even just search up MakeCode Arcade, and this is the homepage that you're going to be looking for. So in the top, we have a banner showcasing all the brand new features that are coming to the platform. We then have new projects. So we're going to be making one in just a moment. You can see I've already worked on a Matilda game already, but we're going to be starting fresh from new projects. If you were to scroll down further, you have beginner skill maps and next level skill maps. What these are is actually kind of brings you on a game-like journey, essentially, as you learn about different coding skills. And by the end of it, you've created a bit more of a complex game. And then you have numerous tutorials and multiplayer tutorials and so much more that is completely freely accessible with no sign-in required for Microsoft MakeCode Arcade. So what we're going to do is we're going to, first of all, click on the plus icon and create our very own project. So, Niamh, what do you think we're going to call our project?
Matilda.
Matilda, exactly, yeah. So I'm going to call it Matilda.
Very creative and original.
I'm going to go create, yeah, exactly, yeah. And it's going to bring us to our coding interface or our coding platform. So over here on our left, we have our simulator. So this is going to allow us to actually run our games. It kind of looks like a classic Game Boy. There's a couple of different features on it. We have our D-pad. So you can actually move it around with your mouse or with your touchscreen if you're working on a touchscreen device. And once you've interacted with the simulator, you can actually use WASD to move the keys as well, or your arrow keys as well on your keyboard. We have an A button and a B button, and we can actually refresh our simulator by hitting this little icon or having it stop running by clicking that little icon. If you want to test your game on a full screen, you can actually expand your simulator by clicking launch in full screen, and then you have your gamepad looking more like a Nintendo Switch or something along those lines, okay? You can mute it as well if you do add music. So I know a lot of teachers were probably asking their students to mute it. There's a lot of music going on there. And then in the center here, we have our coding categories. So these represent all the different kind of categories we can pull from. We already looked at sprites, so that's going to be where we're going to get our character of Matilda. And then we have other ones like controller and game and music. But the cool thing about the interface from MakeCode Arcade is that it's running block-based coding for the one we're going to be working with. And Niamh, can you tell us a little bit about block-based coding, what makes it so special?
I think it's a great way to introduce people to coding if you've never coded before, but I like to think of it as like digital Lego bricks that you're able to stack them on top of each other, and they have to be connected in order for it to work properly.
Yeah, exactly. And you're going to see that in action in just a moment. If you progress on your coding journeys, which I hope you do after today, you can actually go up here and you can toggle over to JavaScript and Python, two other kind of programming languages that are a bit more complex than block-based coding, but they're really, really powerful languages as well. Maybe we'll explore them in a future GeneSpace Live. Over here is our coding canvas, and this is where we're actually going to be placing our blocks of code. Now, as we can see on our simulator, it's a blank space for the moment. So we need to put in two things in there. We need to put in our setting, and we need to put in our character. So we need to set the scene. And obviously, to do that, we're going to go to our scene category. You see there's numerous different kind of like subcategories inside of them. So we have a scene, then we have screen. If you scroll down further, you have camera, you have effects. And the one we're looking for here is going to be set background image 2. So I'm going to drag that out and I'm going to place it just there. And it's going to go a really weird color. Niamh, can you tell me why it's not kind of maintain the color it had when it's in its category?
Because, Michael, we have our very first bug in
Yeah.
our code.
Yeah.
So remember earlier we said they have to be connected in order for them to work. So right now that block of code is not connected to our event block on start.
Yeah, exactly. So to do that, we drag it up. You can see there's a little bit of a shadow, which means that's where it's going to slot into, and we then attach it. To customize your background, you click on the gray square just over here, and then you open up your basically your pixel art tool. So you can actually draw whatever you'd like here, There's numerous different tools over here on the left. You have an eraser, you can have a paint bucket, so you can paint the entire background if you'd like. But what we're going to use, because we're given a tutorial, is we're actually going to be using some of the pre-made assets that can be found in the gallery. So the MakeCode Arcade team have actually created a handful of backgrounds that you can use, and the one we're going to be using is the one we discussed earlier on, which is going to be our simple setting of a town. So I'm going to click on that, and then we're going to go down here, and then we're going to click on Done. Okay, so just in the bottom right-hand corner, you can see Done. Click on that, and then it's going to bring you back out to your coding canvas. It's going to take a minute to load, and then your simulator will now have your town background set up. Next of all, Neve, we need to introduce who?
Matilda, of course.
And to do that, we're going to go into our sprites category in the top. That's our blue sprites category. And you see this first block here, which is, we actually lied a little bit earlier on. We said all the blocks are color coordinated to the different categories that they come from. But our sprites one kind of is both a sprite and also a variable at the same time. So that's why it's that red and blue color. So it says set my sprite to sprite of kind player. That's the one we're looking for. I'm going to drag that out. I'm actually going to connect it underneath my background image, and now it's time to customize it. So again, we're going to click our gray square. We can draw our character if we like. So this is where you're going to draw your Harry Potter. This is where you're going to draw your Skullduggery Pleasant. Or, just due to time, you can click into gallery, and there's a huge gallery of pre-made sprites for us. So I'm going to scroll down until we find the one that we have chosen to represent Matilda in our game. I'm going to take a moment. Here she is. I'm going to click on that. And now I can actually customize it. So if you remember the illustration and the illustrated Matilda book that we had on screen a moment ago, she actually had a blue jumper, I believe. So we're actually going to be able to customize this one by going into our blue color over here. And then we can actually then just recolor. So Matilda now has her blue jumper on her. And I'm going to change these up here as well to have like blue in her hair as well. Okay? And then I'm going to hit done. Now, Neve, are we finished with that block? Do we need to be worried about it anymore?
Well, can you move, Michael?
We can't move at the moment, but we also have to make sure that our variable is actually named correctly.
Oh, yeah, that's really important.
Yeah, 100%. So when you're working with variables in coding, making sure that they're named correctly is really, really important. So we have my sprite here. To change that, you click on your little drop-down arrow. They're really important when it comes to MakeCode. And you can see there's my sprite, new variable, or rename variable. I'm going to rename that and name it our main character, Matilda. Going to hit OK. And then let's look at the rest of that block. It says set Matilda to sprite of kind player. I think that looks OK. But just to take note, Matilda is our player, so you don't have to change it for now. But there is different of kinds when it comes to sprites, such as projectiles, food, enemy, and so on. But we're going to be exploring those a little bit later on. So I think now, Neve, is probably a good time to just take a moment and pause and allow you all to set your scene, set your background, and introduce your first character into your MakeCode Arcade game. So it's time to kind of look at our next concept of the day. So the next one we're going to be looking at is quite simple. It is the control statement. So these are going to be the rules that make our game interactive. They let us move our characters and keep score and so on. Obviously, Matilda is kind of just chilling out there in the center of the screen. We now need to kind of create a block of code to actually be able to control Matilda.
So I was getting ahead of myself there when I wanted her to move earlier.
Exactly, yeah. So what we're going to do, folks, is we're going to jump back over into our game. We're going to go into the controller category. And it's actually the first block that pops up there that says move my sprite with buttons. I'm going to drag that over and I'm going to place it just underneath Matilda. And you will see in just a moment a little error triangle is going to pop up for us. Neve, what do you think that error triangle means?
Must mean we have a bug in our code.
We have a bug in our code. Should we throw our hands up? Should we give up?
No. Persistence is key.
So that's because my sprite doesn't actually exist. If you remember correctly, earlier on, we renamed our variable, our sprite, to Matilda. So we need to make sure that this block refers to Matilda. I'm going to click on that. Another thing I really want to emphasize, folks, is the sequence of our code. So making sure it makes logical sense when you read from top to bottom. Computers read top to bottom like the majority of us do. So if I was to have this block up here above the creation of Matilda, the game wouldn't work either, because you're asking it to actually move a character that doesn't exist yet. So make sure you create your sprite and then you're talking about your sprite underneath it. So let's test it out, Neve. Over on my simulator.
Woohoo.
And
look
there
at Matilda go.
There goes Matilda. But unfortunately, for Matilda, she does like to go for walkabouts. She can go off
She's
screen.
wandering.
She's wandering, yeah. So we need to create another block of code that will allow us to make sure Matilda stays on screen. Now, because we're working with a sprite here, Neve, and we're referring to what the sprite can actually do in game, what category do you think we're going to be looking in?
Sprites.
Sprites, of course. So if we go into sprites, you can then just scroll on down until you find a block that says set my sprite stay in screen, and you can see the little toggle just there. I'm going to drag that out. I'm going to place it underneath Matilda moving with buttons. I'm going to refresh, and you're going to see I have an error, a sim error. Again, I need to make sure it refers to Matilda. And now when I move Matilda, she should be able to stay in screen. You will see that this block has a little toggleable button just here. It says on. If I turn that off, Matilda can now break the game and disappear. So we need to make sure those buttons are always either on the off position or the on position, that 1, that 0, that we want it to actually do. All right. So next thing we want to look at is actually the creation of a new asset, right? A new sprite. And this sprite is going to be the collectible.
Oh, very good.
So in this instance of this game, we want our collectible to basically appear on screen every couple of seconds, you know? And to do that, we're kind of creating a game rule. And we're going to be using our game category to do so. So we go into game, and you're going to see there's 2 C-shaped blocks. We mentioned them briefly earlier on, Neve, but these C-shaped blocks, can you tell us a little bit about them?
They're event blocks.
Yeah.
So they will start to, so this second one there, on game update. So every time the game updates, every 500 milliseconds, so that MS stands for milliseconds, something will happen. So whatever blocks of code you put in there, depending on what we want the game to do, will happen.
Yeah, 100%. So I'm going to drag that out, place it in my coding canvas. This is our first block that's actually not going to be connected to our on start block. So I'm going to drag this out. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the same block we used to create Matilda earlier on, but this time it's going to be for her collectible of books. So you're going to sprites. I drag set my sprite, place it just underneath here. And again, a couple of things we need to do with this block. I'm going to change, I can create my collectible if I wanted to draw it, but I'm actually going to go into the gallery, and I know there's a bookshelf down here that can actually represent Matilda's books. Scroll on down. Where is it?
There's
just
loads
here.
of sprites to choose from. Which
There's a lot of sprites to choose from. Yeah, 100%. So I would highly recommend, I know if you want to get really, really nitty gritty and draw your sprite from scratch, I would recommend maybe using one of the gallery ones as a placeholder for now and coming back and changing it.
That's a great idea.
You know, you have plenty of time to do that maybe after the lesson. So I'm going to hit done. And you're going to see now that the collectible is going to pop up on screen in the center every 500 milliseconds.
So that's half of 1 second.
100%, yeah. So I can change that again if I wanted to make it maybe every 1 second or every 2 seconds. I have to rename this variable. So I'm going to rename this variable to books. That's going to be our collectible. And then finally, Neve, we have to look at the end here, which was of kind player, but
Matilda,
collectibles and books aren't going to be our player. Yeah,
Matilda's our player.
Exactly, yeah. So if I use this little drop down arrow, I can actually create a new of kind. So there's projectile, food, enemy. Not many of them actually fit what we're looking for here. So I might have to add a new of kind, and I'm going to call it knowledge.
Oh.
Yeah, I know, right? Because books are knowledge. And then that means now that our collectible is in the center here, and I think we are happy out with it. Next of all, we want to actually move that collectible so that it's not just always on top of Matilda at the very outset. So I can do that by going into sprites. I'm going to look at this block here that says set my sprite to position x0, y0. I'm going to drag that out. I'm going to place it just there. Now, Neve, can you tell us a little bit about that x and y? What does that mean?
Absolutely. So your x-axis, so this is bringing in a little bit of maths here.
Yeah.
Your x-axis is a horizontal line, whereas your y-axis is vertical.
Exactly.
So, but in game design, what you're used to is kind of different to what you're used to in maths, let's say, is different to game design because your x and y axis are inverted. So it means it's flipped.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So if we go into this and change from my sprite to books, I can now see that books is going to pop up in our 0, 0 up here. And just like Neve said, there's a little bit of a tricky one here. X is on our bottom here and Y is up here. And I think everyone would think that X0, Y0 is down here. X is actually fine, but it's actually the Y that's flipped. So Y0 is up here. If you haven't looked at coordinate geometry and math, don't even worry about it. You can test it out by just clicking our little numbers here in our X and Y. and changing it around with the pop-up up there. So we're going to be looking at how we can actually make that random in just a moment, but there's a few things we covered there. So we're going to take a moment to pause now, and we want you to have your player stay in screen, have your player move her buttons, have your new collectible created, have it set on screen somewhere around the screen, and then have your on-game update. So basically catch up with where we are right now in our game. And we're going to give maybe, what do you think, maybe 5 to 10 minutes is a good bit of work there. So we're going to give about 5 to 10 minutes for you all to catch up with us here. If you have any issues, please let us know. So what we're going to look at now, folks, is we're actually going to look at the concept of randomization. Okay, so this is a mathematical concept, and it's going to allow us to basically have our game choose random numbers, and we can use those numbers then to change the position on our x-axis and our y-axis. So this is going to be used to spawn in cherries if you're using that as a collectible, or in our instance, and it's going to be used to actually spawn in our books on different points around the screen. The next concept as well, because we're going to be covering it now in a second as well, is we're going to look at collision detection. Okay, and in game that in our MakeCode Arcade, that means overlaps. So that essentially means that this is how the game knows when two sprites, like Matilda and her books, actually run into each other, right? So that's our next two pieces. So we want our collectible to jump around the screen, and then we also want something to happen once Matilda runs into the books and actually collects them. So I'm going to jump back over to my game now. Hope everyone is getting on A-okay. So I'm back into my game here. And you can see again that my collectible is just staying in the one position. We're going to have to look at randomizing these x-axis and this y-axis. And we're going to use that, we're going to find the block to do that in our math category. So if we click into math, that purple category in the bottom, I can scroll down small bit. So there's a lot here. So in coding, in computer science, you can actually do a lot of mathematical operations, you can plus, minus, and so on. But if you scroll down, you'll see there's a roundy block that says pick random 0 to 10. And what you're going to do with this block is, this block will actually be able to fit right into that slot, right? And why that is allowed is because that was a roundy kind of a block, and it was a roundy kind of a slot for the number to go into. So now it reads set book to position X, pick random 0 to 10. And you will see now that my collectible up here is kind of every 2 seconds fidgeting a small bit, and that's because it's just going over and back on the x-axis in the top left. So we're going to have to find out how wide our x-axis is in our game. And how do you think we're going to be able to do that, Neve?
That's a really good question, but why don't we use the toggle from beforehand, where you could toggle over and see how large the x-axis and y-axis is?
Yeah, exactly, yeah. So if we actually go right back to where we set our image, we click into that, and you will actually see in the bottom left here, it could be tricky to see, it's going to tell you your image width and your image height. So our image width is going to be our x-axis, and that's going to be 160 pixels wide. And then our height, just to take note for later on, is 120 pixels high. So for our x-axis, Neve, this block is going to read what? It's going to be pick random 0 to?
160.
Exactly, yeah. So a 0 to 160. The next one is we're going to have to fill in for our Y block. I'm actually going to let you in on a little tip. Anyone who's working with a keyboard or mouse, or even with a touchscreen, if you right-click on a block, you can have this little menu pop up and allow you to actually duplicate blocks. Or if you're on a touchscreen, if you just long press onto it, it'll bring up this menu as well. So I'm going to drag out duplicate, and I'm going to have this block again, and I'm going to be able to place it inside my y-axis. If you don't want to do that duplicate feature, you can just pop back over into the math category and find the random block again. But our y isn't as big as our x-axis, isn't it? So no, it's going to be pick random 0 to?
120.
Exactly, right? So I'm going to pop that in there. I'm going to see what that looks like. So I'm going to refresh my game, and you can see now, every 2 seconds, we're going to have a new collectible pop up on screen. It's actually not as exciting as I thought it was going to be. So what do you think we can change to maybe pop up more collectibles?
Well, we're going to have to add something else to our game.
Yeah, 100%. So we can add a little bit more to our game, but this is where you can actually customize your game as well. So if we wanted those to pop up a bit faster, we can actually bring that down. So we set it to 2 seconds earlier on. Maybe if we put it to maybe 1 second, they can pop up a bit quicker on screen. Whoa. And there you go, right? So you can customize your game here with these little drop-down menus.
Matilda has a lot of books to collect.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of knowledge to acquire. So the next thing we're going to need, folks, is one of those blocks that allow us to kind of build in that collision detection on screen. It's going to be labeled as an overlap block. Because we're working with overlap of sprite on a sprite, it's going to be in the sprites category. So I go into sprites, I scroll on down, and it actually has its very own subcategory, so it says overlaps. And it's a C-shaped block. So it says on sprite of kind player overlaps other sprite of kind player. I'm going to drag that down. I'm going to place it just there. And what I want to happen, Neve, is I want Matilda to get a little bit of a reward, you know? So to actually get a score when she collects her books and collects her knowledge. And to change score and timer and life when we're talking about game, it's actually going to be in our info category just here. So if I click into info, you're going to see we have score and we have life and we have countdown just here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to have change score by 1, place that inside our overlap block. But I've actually forgotten something. I haven't set my score to be 0 at the very outset of our game. So where is that going to go, Neve?
So that would have to go back into your original one on start, because anytime you start your game, you're always going to want the score to be at 0.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. So I'm going to change set score to 0. I'm going to place that inside my on start block. So now it's on the start of the game, it's going to be 0, but every time Matilda runs into a book, she's going to be able to collect it. But she's not getting any scores, and that's staying 0 up there. Can you tell, do you have any guesses, Neve? Maybe we have to go into a little bit of a debug mode here to figure it out.
Yeah, you have a little bug in our code. So you know your overlap block?
Yeah.
You have there that when the player overlaps with the player, but it needs to be when the player overlaps with, and you called it knowledge.
Oh, of course, because our book collectible was of kind knowledge,
yeah.
And it says of kind player. I'm going to change that to of kind player to of kind knowledge. Okay, excellent. Now, time to test out our game again. We're going to go down here. And Matilda's getting a lot of points. The books aren't going anywhere.
Yeah.
So something we got to do is that once Matilda collects the book needs to be destroyed or disappear, essentially. Right? Yeah. And because, again, we are looking at sprites, we can find it in our sprites category. So we're going to sprites, and we're going to scroll on down. There's going to be a few different ones, and it's actually in our effects category. It says destroy. Drag this down and place it here. Okay. Now, this is going to be a tricky one to wrap your head around, but it's basically a good indication of how precise and how specific you have to be when we're talking about computer science and about coding. We actually have to use a variable that was inside our overlaps block to be able to actually put it into this destroy block. So I have to go into here and I have to click this other sprite, drag it, and then replace it down here. And what that means, Neve, I'll zoom in just so it's a little bit clearer for everyone watching. What that means is that I've told my computer that, okay, it's not just this one specific variable that you're destroying. I could have changed that to book, but I actually need to make sure it's just the exact one that Matilda is overlapping at that time. So how to do that again? I'm going to actually delete both of them just so everybody can see. One more time. So it will say destroy my sprite. You have to click other sprite in your overlap block, drag it down, and that will replace my sprite. That will give my sprite boot, and then you can just delete it by dragging it back over into our categories corner. Okay, so a few bits to catch up on there. I'm going to zoom in just so you guys can see. I might even go full screen so you can see all of our code nicely. Be sure to reference that as you're creating your own game. And what we're going to do, folks, is we're going to pause now, and we're going to give maybe about 4 minutes just for you all to catch up with us on our game so far. So that is having your collectible jump around screen, using your random block from math category. You're going to be using your overlaps block from the sprites category, and then you're going to be changing your score from our info category, and we're going to be destroying our other sprite block. So there's a good few bits there, so be sure to let us know if you have any issues. And now is a good time to pause and catch up with our code. Okay, brilliant, folks. So, Neve, any more we need to do with our game?
Well, I think just a few more minutes because we need to start wrapping up our game. But I think it'd be cool, like, if we could add maybe a timer or something like that to our game.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so that's actually going to be the final kind of concept of today's game. We're going to introduce a countdown timer. Even though we love Matilda collecting her books and so on, we need to add a little bit of a challenge. All good games have a little bit of a challenge for us to basically kind of incentivize us to actually play it. So this keeps track of how much time is left in the game. So how we're going to do that, Neve, is what we're going to do is we're going to jump back over into our game. And we're going to go into our info category because we might have actually spotted it earlier on when we were introducing our score.
Oh, I noticed you pointed out actually, yeah.
There's a couple of different, basically there's a couple of different subheadings in this info section. So if we scroll on down, and you're going to find the countdown subheading, and we have start countdown 10 seconds. So I'm going to drag that out. I'm going to place it into on start because we want the countdown to start on the very beginning.
Just like the score, you want the score to be 0.
Yeah.
So you want your timer to start at the beginning of your game too.
100%. And this is where you can get really flexible and customizable with your game. I'm going to give my Matilda 60 seconds to complete her game. To complete and collect as many books as possible. So I can refresh my simulator, go full screen, and now it's time to actually test my game. So what's happening is I'm collecting my books.
Woohoo!
And I see my score going up on the top right-hand corner. And now I have 60 seconds to do so. The cool thing about this, Niamh, is that now that we're practically finished our book, we can actually go back and look at, is there any little fine-tuning we can do to make the game even better? Maybe 60 seconds is too much of a time limit. Maybe I want to add an effect to our collectibles as they're actually being destroyed. Yeah. Exactly, yeah. Make it a bit more interactive. So, a couple of things I want to add to my game. We have finished our game, which is excellent, but a couple more things. I want to add a little bit more spice to it. I want to add an effect to our sprite when it actually gets destroyed, our books, our collectibles. So how to do that is we can go down to destroy other sprite. Remember in our overlap C-shaped block, click this little plus icon. And those little plus icons are really handy when it comes to MakeCode. It allows us to add kind of modifiers to it, so customize it. So we can have an effect happen. So we have spray, so I can do that drop down. We have spray, trail, fountain, confetti. What one do you want to go for, Niamh?
I was going to say hearts.
Hearts?
But let me see. Oh my God, there's loads to choose from. This is a tough one because there's so many. Will we try spray and see what that one looks like first of all?
Yeah, okay, let's go for spray. I'm going to refresh my game. I'm going to go over here and there's a little bit of a spray.
Oh, yeah, I like that one.
I actually like that one because it kind of lends itself to Matilda's powers somewhat, right? Another thing is I want to introduce players to my game. So I wanted to splash up on screen the title of my game as it actually gets introduced. And to do that, I can go into our game category. You see, scroll down a small bit, and there's the prompt just down here. I can drag out splash. Now, this is what I want to happen at the very outset of our game, Niamh. So where do you think I'm going to place it?
On start.
On start. So I'm going to place it on start. I'm going to make sure it's above everything else. Before it does anything else, I want my game
It's kind of like a book
to say
cover.
the title. Yeah, actually, yeah, it kind of is like a book cover, yeah. So I can include in my splash, I'm going to say Matilda by Roald Dahl. Okay, now to test that out, I refresh, I go full screen, and now, so that's not straight into my game, it's waiting for me to play, I can press A, and now I have 60 seconds to collect my books. Okay?
That is really cool. I love the spray effect.
It is pretty cool on our spray effect. So our game now is complete, folks. What we want you guys to do now for the next 2 minutes, just before wrap up, is add those little fine-tuning effects if you want to make your game a bit more customized, a bit more polished, essentially. And we want you then to have people around you have a go at your game, play your game, right? And I want you also to put on your critical lens and see, okay, how could I make my game better? If I was to do it again, what would I do to improve it, or what would I change? And then finally, the big piece, folks, is how could I improve it in the future, all right? So you're not actually one and done here. You can continue to work on your game in 2 different ways. I'm going to quickly show you that you can actually download your MakeCode Arcade file in the bottom left-hand corner, or, which is even more convenient, if you click this little icon in the top right-hand corner, you can actually share your game. So my project title is Matilda. I can hit Share Project, and that's my project link. I can send it to myself, I can copy it and send it, email it to myself, and so on. If you have a tablet or so on, or a teacher, maybe if you want to track these and take pictures of them, it's actually a QR code that you can scan, and it will pop open the exact game that you're working on. It makes it easy to transfer between devices that you're working on, and allows you to share with maybe your adults at home if you wanted to bring back and say, look what I did to actually celebrate International Literacy Day. So we're going to give you guys maybe 60 seconds on that, and then myself and Niamh are going to wrap up for the day. Okay, hope everyone's having a great time. Okay, folks, so we're coming to the end of today, Niamh. Did you have fun celebrating International Literacy Day?
I love the game we made.
What was your highlight?
I think was adding like the cool features to your game. It made it feel like a real game.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I think that was really cool as well. Like the final touch is always kind of that final polish of a game that kind of makes it special. Thank you so much for celebrating International Literacy Day with us here in Microsoft Ireland's Dream Space. But myself and Niamh are going to rhyme off just maybe a handful of other things you can do to celebrate UNESCO's International Literacy Day outside of this live lesson. So first and foremost, folks, you can share your story. Use the hashtag I am a lifelong learner to share your literacy learning story on social media. Show how reading and coding have helped you.
You can also organize a book swap. So organize a book swap in your community or school. So this promotes the importance of reading and reusing books. And that's something we do in Microsoft. We actually have a bookshelf. When you're finished reading the book, you can leave it on the shelf for someone else to enjoy.
You can have a community story time. Host a virtual or in-person story time session where you read books or share stories that focus on peace, sustainability, or social justice.
You can do literacy in action. So use your new coding skills to create a simple game that educates players about social issues like climate change or equality.
You can donate books, collect books and donate them to local libraries, schools or charities that focus on education.
And then always there's so much more to learn. So research and learn about global literacy rates and challenges. Think about how you can contribute to improving literacy locally and or globally.
Yeah, exactly. And that has brought us to the end of this Dreamspace live session celebrating International Literacy Day. Thank you so much for joining us and hope you have a fantastic day. There's so much more Dreamspace lives coming up, so be sure to stick around. You can see a few links and what is actually planned in the schedule for Dreamspace Live over the next couple of weeks. So from myself, thank you so much. Have a great day. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.